My name is Ida, and I am 68 years old. For 42 years, I worked as a senior librarian at the county archive, and yesterday they threw me a retirement party in the staff lounge. There was a sheet cake that said, "Happy Retirement Ida," in loopy blue letters, and a pile of gift cards from big box stores. People I had known for decades shook my hand, their words kind, but their eyes already moving past me towards the next thing. My son David was there in a sharp suit that looked too tight around the shoulders. His wife Chloe stood beside him, her smile perfect and unwavering, like something carved from very clean, very white plastic. She held the hands of my two grandchildren, Jake and Lily, who fidgeted in their stiff clothes. I felt a deep pull of love for those children, and a familiar hollow ache for my son, who seemed to look through me more often than at me these days. The room was too loud, the laughter too sharp. I wanted to be back among my silent stacks of books, where everything had its place and the rules were clear. That was when Lily, my 5-year-old granddaughter, tugged on Chloe's elegant sleeve, her little face smeared with chocolate frosting. She had gotten into the cake early. Before I could think, the words came out gentle and automatic, the way I'd spoken to David 1,000 times. "Oh, sweetheart, maybe that's enough sugar for now." Chloe's plastic smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned cold. She looked right at me, and in a voice clear and bright enough to cut through the party chatter, she said, "Oh, Ida, don't be such a bitter old woman. Your time is over. Let people live." The few conversations nearby stuttered and died. I looked at David, my son. He studied the floor tiles as if they held the secrets of the universe, his silence a louder agreement than any shout. In that moment, surrounded by people celebrating my career, I have never felt more invisible. If you have ever felt your voice shrink in your own family, or been made to feel that your experience no longer matters, then you might understand the quiet earthquake that began inside me right then. Before I tell you what I did, I am genuinely curious about the community we are forming here. Where are you listening from today? Please take a second to say hello and tell me your state or country in the comments below. And if you want to hear how a woman who spent her life organizing the stories of others finally decided to write her own, please hit the subscribe button. It truly helps. The silence in my car after leaving that party was heavier than any I had ever known in my library. It pressed against my eardrums. I drove the familiar 15 minutes back to my house, the one my husband Henry and I bought 45 years ago, with a combination of hope sweat and a 30-year mortgage we weren't sure we could afford. Every shingle, every creaky floorboard was a chapter of our life. David learned to ride his bike on that cracked driveway. Henry painted the porch swing a cheery yellow the summer before he got sick. This house was not just a structure. It was my last cherished archive. Inside, the quiet was different. It was a waiting quiet. I put my purse on the hall table next to a framed photo of Henry holding a 2-year-old David on his shoulders, both of them laughing. The contrast between that memory and the man David had become standing silent while his wife eviscerated me was a physical pain. I made a cup of tea I did not want and sat at the kitchen table, the Formica cool under my wrists. It had not always been this way. After Henry died too young from a heart attack that stole him between one breath and the next, David and I became a tight, grieving unit of two. He was 16, all sharp angles, and a sorrow too big for his body. We talked about everything over meatloaf and mashed potatoes at this very table. He told me about his dreams. I told him stories about his father. We were a team. Then he met Chloe at some corporate networking event in his late 20s. She was all gleaming energy and ambitious plans from a family that wore their wealth like a second skin. The Prescotts, Harold and Beatrice Prescott. They lived in a gated community with a name like Whispering Oaks Estates and drove cars that cost more than my house. David was dazzled. I saw the charm, yes, but I also saw the way her eyes calculated the age of my furniture, the slight pause before she touched anything. I saw how David started to apologize for things that needed no apology. The homemade pie, the cozy clutter of books, the fact that I worked in a library and not a boardroom. The real shift, the seismic one, happened 6 years ago. Harold and Beatrice came to see me here in this kitchen. No gated community formality. They were rattled. Harold's voice, usually so booming, was thin. A series of bad investments, a deal gone sour, a liquidity crisis, they called it. The bank was going to call in a massive loan. They would lose everything, their reputation, their home. They needed $2 million to bridge the gap just for 18 months, 24 at most. They would pay a fair interest rate. They pleaded. They invoked David and Chloe's future, the stability of my grandchildren. "You are family now, Ida," Beatrice had said, her perfectly manicured hand trembling over mine. I had the money. It was the sum total of my financial life. Henry's life insurance, my decades of frugal saving, a conservative but steady growth from my retirement fund. It was my security, my cushion against a world that has little use for old women. But I thought of David. I thought of the shame it would bring on him if his in-laws collapsed so publicly. I thought foolishly that this ultimate act of help would bind us, would prove my worth beyond homemade pies and babysitting. So I said yes. We drew up a simple but legally sound agreement on my lawyer friend Martin's stationery. I transferred the money in 3 lots. The gratitude was effusive, overwhelming. For about 6 months. Then the mentions of repayment grew vague. "The market is still recovering, Ida. We are restructuring, darling, patience." Then Chloe started her lifestyle brand, The Prescott Point, all about elegant, effortless living. The photos featured her parents' redecorated lake house, their vintage European car. My questions, always gentle, were met with increasing irritation from Chloe. "Mom, they're good for it," David would say, his voice strained. "Don't nag. It's embarrassing." So I stopped asking. I buried the agreement in my filing box in the basement, and I buried my worry with it. I told myself family was more important than money. I told myself I was being a bitter old woman for worrying. Until last night, when she said the words "for me and my son" agreed. Sitting at my table, the cold tea in front of me, I understood. My kindness had not been seen as strength. It had been catalogued as weakness. My silence had not been appreciated as patience. It had been filed under pushover. They had taken my money, and now they were coming for my dignity and, finally, for my home. That hollow ache inside me began to solidify into something else, something quiet and cold and very, very clear. The following week passed in a strange, suspended animation. David did not call. Not to apologize, not to explain, not to check on me. That silence was its own answer, more devastating than any argument. It told me where I stood, or rather where I no longer stood in his life. I went through the motions, watering my roses, reading the newspaper, volunteering for my usual shift at the local animal shelter. The dogs, with their uncomplicated affection, were a solace. Then, on Sunday afternoon, the familiar sound of David's SUV pulling into the driveway. My heart, traitorous thing, leapt for a second before settling into a wary thud. He was not alone. Chloe emerged, a vision in athleisure wear that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. The children tumbled out, Jake chasing Lily towards the porch. "Grandma!" Lily yelled, and that word was a balm. They came inside the children, filling the space with noise and energy. Chloe did not sit. She paced the living room, her eyes doing their usual inventory. "This Victorian trim is really quite detailed, Ida," she said, not as a compliment, but as an appraiser, noting an outdated feature. "Must be a nightmare to dust." David shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something. A sort of next steps plan." My throat tightened. "Next steps. We're looking at houses," Chloe announced, as if sharing exciting news. "In the new development over on the ridge. 4 bedrooms, a media room, a chef's kitchen. It's the perfect community for raising a family. Lots of young professionals." "It's a great opportunity," David added, not meeting my eyes. "That sounds lovely for you," I said, carefully stroking Lily's hair as she leaned against my knee. "Well, that's just it," Chloe said, her smile widening. "It got us thinking about you. This house is so big, all these stairs, that ancient furnace. It's a lot for one person to manage. We've been looking at some wonderful senior living options. There's a new facility, the Orchards. It has activities, meal plans, on-site nursing. You'd never have to worry about a thing." The air left the room. They were not just insulting me now, they were planning my erasure, packing me away neatly so my house, my last piece of Henry, could become, what? A sale to fund their media room, a rental property. David saw the look on my face and hurried to speak. "It's about safety, Mom, and convenience. You wouldn't have to worry about the yard or repairs." I looked at my son, this man I had raised, whose skinned knees I had bandaged, whose college essays I had proofread. "You think I am not safe in my own home?" My voice was whisper quiet. Before he could answer, Jake, playing with an old wooden train set of Henry's, bumped the coffee table. A glass of water I had set there tipped over a small flood spreading across the polished wood. Chloe gasped as if he had set the house on fire. "Jake! For heaven's sake!" She whirled on me, her composure shattered. "See, this is what I mean. This old house is full of clutter and hazards. It's not a suitable environment." Hazards. My love, my memories, my life's work reduced to a hazard. In that moment, I looked past her anger, past David's guilty flinch. I looked into my son's eyes, really looked, and I saw not malice, but a profound, cowardly relief. Relief at the idea of having me and all my messy, aging, complicated needs professionally managed and out of sight. He was outsourcing his filial duty, and Chloe had provided the perfect brochure for it. A deep tectonic calm settled over me. The hurt crystallized into resolution. "I see," I said, my voice now steady, devoid of emotion. "This is a lot to consider. I am feeling rather tired right now. We will discuss this another time." The dismissal was so firm, so final, it left them blinking. Chloe recovered first, her social mask snapping back into place. "Of course, we just want what's best." They gathered the children, the visit cut awkwardly short. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, Jake's small hand waving from the back window. I did not go inside. I walked directly to the side door that led down to the basement. I flicked on the single bulb that illuminated the steep stairs. The air was cool and smelled of earth and old paper. In the corner behind Christmas decorations and a box of David's childhood artwork was a small, fireproof lockbox. I brought it upstairs to the kitchen table, the same table where I had agreed to gut my financial security for their benefit. The key was on my key ring always. I opened the box. There, beneath my passport and Henry's will, was a simple manila folder. Inside, the promissory note signed by Harold Prescott, Beatrice Prescott, and witnessed by David. The printouts of the 3 bank transfers, 2 for $700,000, 1 for $600,000. The email chain starting with effusive thanks and ending with my timid inquiries being met with Harold's terse, "Ida, we are handling it. The market is still soft. Your constant anxiety is not helpful." I spread the papers on the table. $2 million. Not a gift. A loan. A business transaction they had all willfully chosen to forget, hoping I would too. They saw a bitter old woman. I saw a creditor. And a creditor holds power. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the table with a yellow legal pad. I did not write an emotional rant. I made a list, a logical librarian's list. 1. Legal standing. 2. Documentation. 3. Desired outcome. 4. Contingency plans. My goal was not revenge. It was justice. It was the reclamation of my security, my home, and most importantly, my autonomy. The plan that formed in my mind was not loud or dramatic. It was precise. It was a Dewey Decimal System for personal liberation, and the first step required a visit to an old friend. The law offices of Martin Gable were downtown on the second floor of a building that had housed dentists and insurance agents since the 1950s. Martin was a few years older than me, a regular at the archives, who researched local history for his historical novels. He had a kind, rumpled face and eyes that missed nothing. "Ida," he said, rising from his cluttered desk, "this is a surprise. Not a social call, I take it." He gestured to the folder in my hands. "No, Martin. It is a professional consultation." I sat in the chair opposite him and told him the story. I left out the emotional nuances, the party, the bitter old woman comment, the senior living brochures. I presented the facts, only the loan, the parties involved, the agreed terms, the missed deadline, the subsequent refusal to engage. I laid the documents before him. He read them in silence, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. He let out a low whistle. $2 million. Ida, you have the patience of a saint and the financial sense of a... Well, never mind. He looked up. This is ironclad. The statute of limitations is no issue. You could have my associate draw up a demand letter today. We could have a lawsuit filed by the end of the week. I shook my head. That is the nuclear option, Martin. I want to give them a chance to do the right thing, but I need to be prepared for them to refuse. He leaned back, understanding dawning. You want to have the gun loaded, but you want to see if the sight of it is enough. Essentially, yes. I want you to prepare everything. The formal demand letter, the lawsuit draft, everything. I want it ready to file, but I'm going to deliver the initial demand myself. He frowned. Ida, that is highly unorthodox and emotionally fraught. They could bully you. A small, dry smile touched my lips. They have been bullying me for 6 years, Martin. I am done being a good student. I am going to conduct a family meeting. I would like you to email the formal documents to me the morning of that meeting. I will print them. Having your letterhead on the table will make it official. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded, a spark of admiration in his eyes. All right. You are the client. We will have it all ready. Just say the word. I left his office feeling neither triumphant nor afraid. I felt focused. The next step was the invitation. I went home and wrote 4 emails. To David, to Chloe, to Harold, and to Beatrice. The wording was simple, civil, and unyielding. Subject: family meeting. Dear all, please join me for dinner at my home this Saturday at 6 p.m. It is time we had a comprehensive discussion about our family's financial and personal future. I expect everyone to attend. Ida. The replies were telling. David wrote back within minutes. Mom, is this really necessary? Can't we just talk? I wrote back. Saturday, 6 p.m. Chloe's reply was curt. We'll be there. Harold and Beatrice's reply came jointly, a study in strained politeness. We look forward to it, Ida. Saturday morning, Martin's documents arrived in my inbox. I printed them on my modest home printer. The legal paper felt substantial, authoritative. I placed them along with the original agreement and bank statements into a fresh, crisp folder. Then I cooked. I made Henry's favorite pot roast with carrots and potatoes the way my mother taught me. I baked a cherry pie. The house filled with the smells of my history of 1,000 family meals of comfort that was now I knew a language they no longer understood. I was not cooking to nurture them. I was cooking to ground myself, to remind myself of who I was and what I was fighting for. I set the table with my good china, the set Henry and I received for our wedding. I polished the silver. I did everything with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness. This was not a dinner party. It was a laying bare, a final audit. And I, the quiet librarian, was finally ready to present my findings. They arrived precisely at 6, a united front of 4. Harold and Beatrice looked older, more pinched than I remembered their expensive clothes, unable to disguise a permanent air of anxiety. Chloe was armored in a sleek, neutral-toned pantsuit, her phone held like a scepter. David looked pale, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. The meal was a masterpiece of awkwardness. Harold made strained small talk about the stock market. Beatrice complimented the pot roast with the enthusiasm of someone eating cardboard. Chloe picked at her food, her phone buzzing intermittently on the tablecloth beside her plate. David ate in silence, his shoulders hunched. You know, Ida, Chloe said during a lull, sipping her water, the Orchards has a 5-star chef. You would not have to go to all this trouble. The trouble is part of the pleasure, I said mildly, serving myself another spoonful of potatoes. When the cherry pie was served, David cleared his throat. Mom, we appreciate the dinner, and we did want to continue our conversation from last week about your future. The Orchards has a waiting list, and we really think— Harold cut in his voice, assuming a paternal tone he had no right to. Yes, time to be practical, Ida. You cannot be burdened with this big old place. Let the young people help you transition. Burdened. My home was a burden. My presence was a burden. I laid my fork down carefully on the edge of my plate. The faint clink seemed to echo. All eyes turned to me. Before we discuss my house, I began, my voice low, and even the voice I used in the library's reading room. We need to settle the matter of your house, Harold, or more precisely the $2 million of my late husband's life insurance and my retirement savings that allowed you to keep it. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. Beatrice's fork clattered to her plate. Chloe's jaw went slack. Harold's face drained of color, then flushed a deep, mottled red. David stared at me as if I had begun speaking in tongues. Chloe found her voice first, a sharp, disbelieving laugh. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? I did not look at her. I kept my gaze on Harold. I am talking about the loan, the one that was due over a year ago, the one you all seem to have forgotten while you sit in my home and plan my future without me. I reached beside my chair and placed the crisp folder on the table. I opened it. I slid the original promissory note across the tablecloth toward Harold. I fanned out the bank transfer confirmations. Here is the agreement signed by you and Beatrice, witnessed by David. Here is the proof of transfer. $2 million. Here, I said, pulling the last sheet from the bottom, are your emails, Harold, where you acknowledged the debt and asked for my patience before telling me my anxiety was not helpful. David finally spoke a strangled whisper. Mom, not here, not like this. I turned my head slowly to look at my son. When David, after you signed the forms to put me in the orchards, when it was convenient for everyone but me, when I was safely out of the way and could no longer remind you of this inconvenient truth. Harold sputtered, This is a private family matter. This is extortion. This became a public family matter. I said, my voice gaining a razor's edge of steel, when your daughter called me a bitter old woman in front of my colleagues and friends, and when my son agreed with her by his silence. I let that hang in the air. You think I am powerless? My power is in these papers. I then placed Martin's documents on top of the pile. The formal demand letter with its bold letterhead was on top. This, I said, tapping it, is a formal notice of default and demand for immediate payment in full, plus the agreed-upon accrued interest calculated here. I pointed to the figure. It is from my attorney, Martin Gable. You have 30 days from today to wire the full amount to the account specified in that letter. Chloe was vibrating with rage. You can't do this. You're tearing this family apart. No, I corrected her softly. I am collecting a debt, a business debt. If the funds are not received in 30 days, the next document in this pile will be filed with the county court. It is a lawsuit for breach of contract. It will be a matter of public record. I imagine that would be inconvenient for your social media brand, Chloe. The Prescott point would have a rather different connotation. And for your business reputation, Harold, who lends to a man who doesn't pay back his own family? The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of my refrigerator. Beatrice had begun to cry silently. Harold looked like a deflated balloon. Chloe stared at the legal letterhead as if it were a venomous snake. David had buried his face in his hands. I stood up. The discussion about my house is over. This is my house. You may leave now. No one moved for a full 10 seconds. Then with a scrape of chairs, they rose. They filed out without a word, a defeated procession. Harold did not look back. Beatrice could not meet my eyes. Chloe's perfect composure was shattered, replaced by a raw, ugly shock. David was the last to reach the door. He stopped, turned, and looked at me. In his eyes, I did not see anger. I saw for the first time in years a flicker of something that might have been respect, drowned in a sea of shame. Then he was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it. My legs trembled. My heart pounded. But inside in my core there was a stillness, a solidity I had not felt since before Henry died. I had not shouted. I had not cried. I had simply stated the facts, and the facts had been my salvation. The silence after their departure was not the same as the one after the retirement party. That had been a silence of defeat. This was a silence of aftermath, charged and potent. I cleared the table slowly, methodically, washing my wedding china by hand, the warm water a comfort. I did not feel triumphant. I felt empty, scraped clean. I had drawn a line in the sand of my own life, and I had watched my family retreat to the other side of it. The first 48 hours were the strangest. No phone calls, no angry emails, just a void where their presence and their plans for me had been. I occupied myself. I weeded my garden with a ferocious focus. I took long, aimless drives listening to classical music. I visited Henry at the cemetery and told him what I had done. I imagined his chuckle, his hand squeezing mine. "About damn time, Ida," he would have said. On the evening of the third day, my doorbell rang. It was David alone. He looked years older shadows under his eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded and led him to the living room. He did not sit on the couch. He stood by the fireplace, staring at the photograph of him and his father. "Harold and Beatrice are scrambling," he said to the mantelpiece. "They're trying to liquidate some assets. They'll pay you. They have to." "I know they have to," I said quietly. "The law is clear." He turned then, and his face was a mask of anguish. "Why didn't you ever tell me, really tell me, how much it bothered you, how scared you were?" I looked at my son, truly looked at him. "I tried, David. Every time I mentioned it, you told me I was nagging. You told me it was embarrassing. You asked me not to rock the boat. Your boat. Chloe's boat. Their boat. I took a steadying breath. My fear was less important than your comfort. My security was less important than their reputation. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I didn't see it that way. I know you didn't. You saw a mother who would always be there, who would always understand, who would always sacrifice. You stopped seeing me as a person with her own bank account, her own fears, her own right to the security I worked my entire life to build. My voice trembled, but I held it firm. I love you, David. I will always love you. But I am not just your mother. I am Ida, and I will not be disappeared into a brochure for a senior living facility so you can feel less guilty about enjoying the life my money helped preserve for your wife's family. Tears filled his eyes, but they were not the manipulative tears of a child. They were the painful, honest tears of a man facing an ugly truth about himself. I am so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I was weak. I wanted the easy life Chloe represented. I wanted to belong in their world, and I sold you out to do it. There it was, the confession. It hung in the air between us, awful and necessary. I did not rush to comfort him. The wound needed to be acknowledged, not band-aided over. What happens now? He whispered. Now, I said, we rebuild. But not on the old foundation. That is gone. It was built on my silence and your convenience. If we are to have a relationship, it will be as adults, with respect, with clear boundaries. You are my son, but you are not my keeper, and I am your mother, but I am not your patient. He nodded, wiping his eyes. And the kids? They are my grandchildren. I want to see them, but not as a babysitting service, not as a duty. We will plan visits. You will respect my time and my home. Okay, he said, okay. He left not long after, the distance between us still vast, but the path back, however long, was now visible. It would be a path we walked as separate people, not as appendages. 3 weeks and 4 days after the dinner, a notification popped up on my online banking app, a wire transfer. I opened it. The amount took my breath away. The full principal, the calculated interest, every last cent. The memo line read, Loan repayment, Prescott. I closed the app. I did not call anyone. I sat at my kitchen table and I cried. I cried for the loss, for the betrayal, for the years of swallowed anxiety. And then, when the tears were spent, I felt a weight lift from my chest, a weight I had carried for so long I had forgotten what it was like to breathe without it. The power was not in the money, it was in the choice. And for the first time in a very long time, the choices were mine alone to make. With the money restored, I faced a new question. What now? This was not a windfall. It was a restitution. It was my life returned to me. I felt a profound responsibility to use it wisely, not just for myself, but to forge a new kind of legacy, one based on clarity and intention, not guilt and obligation. My first act was to call a reputable contractor, a friend of a friend from the animal shelter. Together we walked through my house. I did not want a glamorous renovation. I wanted safety, comfort, and longevity. We updated the electrical system, installed a subtle, effective bathroom safety system, and replaced the ancient furnace with a modern, efficient one. I had the porch repaired and the swing repainted that same cheery yellow. I was not preparing the house for sale. I was fortifying my castle. Next, I made an appointment with a financial advisor, a no-nonsense woman named Susan, who reminded me of my best reference desk demeanor. We created a solid conservative plan. A portion of the money would ensure I never had to worry about property taxes or unexpected bills again. Another portion was set aside for travel, not extravagant cruises, but the trips Henry and I had dreamed of: a slow train journey through the Canadian Rockies, a rental cottage on the coast of Maine. Then I set up 2 educational trust funds, one for Jake, one for Lily. The terms were simple. The money could only be used for tuition books or vocational training after high school. It was not a lavish gift. It was a key to their own future independence, so they might never feel the pressure to trade their integrity for financial security as their father had. I sent the paperwork to David. His reply was a single line. Thank you, Mom. This is a gift beyond measure. I did not retire from life. I redeployed. I increased my hours at the animal shelter, eventually joining the board. I started a weekly story time for grown-ups at the local library, reading classic short stories to a small appreciative group of seniors. I found my community not based on blood, but on shared interest and mutual respect. My relationship with David evolved slowly in fits and starts. He began visiting alone on Sunday afternoons. We would have coffee. We talked about his work, my volunteer projects, the children. The conversations were careful, sometimes strained, but they were honest. He no longer offered unsolicited advice about my life. He listened. Chloe was a distant, polite figure. She attended family gatherings when the children were involved, but the performative warmth was gone, replaced by a wary, formal civility. The Prescott Point social media feed continued, but the posts about family legacy and effortless grace took on a hollow, ironic tone to my eyes. We had reached an armed truce, and that was enough. One bright Saturday morning in early fall, a year after the fateful dinner, I was in my garden dividing perennials. The sound of a car pulled my attention. It was David's SUV. He got out, and to my surprise, Jake and Lily tumbled out after him without Chloe. "Grandma!" Lily shouted, running towards me with arms outstretched, her shoes kicking up mulch. Jake followed, a bit more reserved at 9, but with a smile. David hung back, leaning against the car. "They wanted to see your garden. I hope it's okay." "Of course it is," I said, gathering Lily in a hug. Jake presented me with a slightly squashed muffin from a bakery bag. "We brought you breakfast." We sat on the porch steps, the three of us sharing the muffin. Lily chattered about school. Jake asked thoughtful questions about the different plants. David watched from the driveway, a soft, unguarded expression on his face. It was not the picture-perfect family scene Chloe would have staged. It was messy, real, and filled with a quiet, healing grace. Later, after they left, I sat on the yellow swing with a cup of tea. The house was silent again, but it was a peaceful, chosen silence. I am still Ida. I am 69 now. I am a retired librarian, a gardener, a volunteer, a grandmother. The labels that once defined me by my relation to others, mother, mother-in-law, bankroller, now felt secondary. The primary label was simply my name. The lesson was not about winning or getting even. It was about remembering that you have a right to the seat at your own table, that your story does not end when someone else decides to stop listening, that sometimes the most powerful action is not a scream, but a sentence spoken calmly, backed by truth and the quiet resolve to see it through. I had spent a lifetime preserving stories. It was time I honored my own. The pages ahead are blank, and that is not a frightening thing. It is a peaceful one, because I hold the pen. If this story of quiet strength resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to reclaim your voice or set a difficult boundary within your family? How did you find the courage? Please share your experiences in the comments below your stories. Inspire me and others in our community. If you found value in this journey and want to hear more stories about resilience rediscovery and the quiet power that comes with age, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these conversations. If you are not yet part of our growing community of thoughtful listeners, I warmly invite you to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. A new story is shared here regularly, and I would be honored to have you along. If you know someone who might need to hear this message today, perhaps someone feeling unseen or undervalued in their own life, please consider sharing this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time can be a lifeline. Thank you for listening, for sharing this space with me, and for being part of a community that believes it is never too late to rewrite your story. Until next time, be kind to yourself, and remember you hold the pen too.